Hey people, this is Imp from Black Talon Gaming, and I want to welcome you to my beginner's guide to Stellaris. I'm publishing this video today because I've got a very special need for this. If you're familiar with my Stellacracy game on Reddit, you can visit, the link will be in the description below, but it's r/Stellacracy. On Reddit, I'm known as Valdir or King Valdir, and one of the things that I was recently asked about that I thought that would be a good topic for me to cover in a video would be if people can participate in that game without owning Stellaris or even without having played it before. And I thought, you know what, ultimately it is a community interactive game. I would like people to have some knowledge of the game mechanics themselves, but no, someone does not have to own the game in order to participate in the democracy game. So this video is really aimed at that community. I think if you're just a Stellaris player and you're trying to figure out how to get started, this will cover some of the basic stuff that you honestly will probably already know. That being said, feel free to watch. It certainly couldn't hurt. But we're going to be talking about the basics and the core mechanics of the game a little bit, just to give an overview to those people who would be wanting to play in Stellacracy without owning the game. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. So, one of the core fundamentals of Stellaris, and really any Paradox game, is the ability to have really kind of unprecedented and to an extent unlimited options in terms of what nation or what empire you're going to play starting out the game. And a lot of the other space simulators or a lot of the other Space 4X games kind of had this. You always have had a racial build option, and so Stellaris has included something like that. So let's go ahead and take a look. When you press on New Game, you get a list of default empires, and it's everything from the United Nations of Earth to the Commonwealth of Man. That's a little interesting thing. Long story short, there are two human factions because one of them was on a sleeper ship that was launched approximately 150 years before the current game time. So they're doing their thing or what have you. And then you have a couple of other space empires that, to some extent, they do have kind of like a backstory. I think the Blorg actually have a decent backstory because I occasionally find their system in game, and the Blorg system itself is usually dead. Like there's always a dead planet that was destroyed by war or something. So couldn't really say fully because I've never fully played a game as the Blorg, but I'm just saying. So you could pick a default race, or you could go in and create a new race. So we go in and create a new race, and this part is important because if you're watching this and you've joined Stellacracy and you've never played Stellaris before, there are pertinent things on the first ballot that you will not understand unless you have really experienced this or at least watched this video. So we go up here to the Species tab. These first three things are entirely aesthetic. So the first thing is the appearance, and we can choose a general genus of our species. Everything from arthropoid to fungoid to mammalian to plantoid. I just added that based on popular demand. You can be a group right there. Go arthropoid and you could be a bug. Or you could go humanoid and you could be a Vulcan space elf or a human or a whatever the fuck that is. So we go down to species name, once again entirely aesthetic, and this is where like a backstory will be. Don't really have too much to say about that. Name lists are just some general name lists that the game has generated so that you can it will automatically generate these names for the names of ships and leaders and stuff like that, so that you don't have to take time and just like try to think of a name for a ship. I mean, it's kind of required, I think. All right, so the first thing that we come to that really is about the mechanics of the game are the traits. And if you've taken a look at the first ballot, you'll notice that we had I think one primary trait pick with 4 alternative picks because we used something the equivalent of the alternative system. And there are something like 20 positive traits, and I think it was like 9 negative traits, somewhere around there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a very quick overview of each one of the traits because this is important for the purpose of voting. All right, so the Agrarian Trait is going to add the ability to produce more food on planets. The more food that you have, the faster your population grows. I cannot be sure. Actually, I think that is actually the limit of what the food statistic does. I hope they expand upon that, maybe that you could sell extra food or something like that, because it would make sense if you have surplus and you're not using it to grow the population, you're just going to sell it to the existing population. Alright, so Thrifty is the same thing, only with energy credits, and energy credits are in the game's currency. All maintenance is paid in energy credits, and it, essentially the idea is that in the future, all of our currencies would be based on like the amount of energy that could be produced or what have you, which that's not a uncommon science fiction trope. You know what I'm saying? That appeared in Alpha Centauri and so on and so forth. Industrious adds more minerals that are produced from your worlds, and minerals are kind of like the game's secondary currency. And whereas I would actually qualify them probably as your primary currency, because your energy credits are going to be used to pay for maintenance, and occasionally you'll buy stuff from a lot of people for energy credits, but it's going to be your access to minerals that is going to be really hampering your ability to build a space fleet or build a space empire. And it primarily does represent exotic and rare materials and metals and stuff like that, but I also like to think that to an extent it also indicates like just industry, like how in civilization you would have your industry meter or whatever. So this is maybe a representation of general industry. Okay, so we go to Intelligent, and Intelligent is the first of 4 different traits that adds bonuses to your ability to produce research. And Intelligence adds a plus 10% across the board. It's a very strong pick for a new player or old player. It's just a really, really good pick. It costs 2 points as compared to 1, and each one of the 1-point versions, the natural engineers, natural physicists, and natural sociologists, adds 15% in one category for 1 point. This adds 30% in all 3 categories, but 30% total. So, I mean, you can definitely see how Intelligent is definitely worth the 2 points in terms of the raw amount that it's being added. And what's crazy is that I spend 1 point and I get 5% more engineering, right? If I spend 1 extra point, I would get almost as much engineering output, but I would also get 10% physics and 10% society. So I mean, like, it's kind of a no-brainer in my opinion, but to be fair, it is cheaper to just go natural engineering or whatever, Okay, let's go ahead and we're going to move past these. Natural engineers plus 15 engineering, natural physicists plus 15 physics, natural sociologists plus 15 society. It's not going to make too much sense right now, but when I actually get into the game itself, it will make a lot more sense then. Alright, so we're at extremely adaptive, and this adds plus 20% to the habitability rating of a planet, whereas adaptive adds only 10% to the habitability rating of a planet. Non-adaptive is the first negative trait and adds a negative 10% habitability rating to a planet. Your habitability rating determines you need at least a 40% habitability rating, I do believe, in order just to colonize a planet. And I think it affects the species' happiness once on the planet. So there's that to keep in mind. So naturally, like extremely adaptive, like if you've got a humanoid species that prefers continental wet worlds or what have you, continental worlds, they would get like a 40% or something like that standard for like a desert world and a 20% standard for a arid world or whatever. Having the extremely adaptive trait would boost that up to 60% and 40% respectively. So the desert world would be a lot more viable as a colony, And you would actually be able to colonize the arid worlds without some extensive terraforming. So there's, one of the interesting things. All right, non-adaptive also just the inverse. It makes it harder for you to colonize. Rapid breeders, you're going to be breeding faster, so your population is going to grow. Looks like it reduces the time to grow population pop by 10%. Slow breeders increases the growth time of a pop by 15%. And when I say pop, you'll see what I mean when I actually get into the game. All right, talented. Leaders start out with an additional skill level. Every leader, every kind of character in the game has a skill level determined by a number of stars, and the more stars they have, the more proficient they are at their particular job. So you can have generals, you can have admirals, you can have scientists, you can have governors. Normally they would start with 1 star, and I think that's like a plus 5% here or there, depending on what their job is. 2 stars would be like a plus 10% or something like that. Quick learners, leader experience gain is going to be plus 25%, and so essentially anytime the leaders would gain experience points, they would gain an extra 25% experience. Slow learners, the exact opposite. Very strong. Army damage is plus 40%, and mineral production is plus 10%, which is really kind of interesting. Weak and regular strong is going to be plus 20% army damage, plus 5% minerals. And then we had, weak, which is minus 20% army damage, minus 5% minerals, which is really interesting because minerals are the really kind of like the choke point in the early game, and I would say probably even later games. Like I've always found mineral, like I run out of minerals before I'll run out of energy. I guess it just depends on the placement and everything like that. But weak and strong and very strong. If it was just the army damage, it would kind of be a useless trait. But because of the mineral and the minerals and how it changes the minerals, I actually think that is a very pertinent thing. All right, so let's go ahead and go to Nomadic. Nomadic just increases the speed at which your pops migrate from one planet to the next, and the amount of, I believe it's influence you have to spend. It's either influence and credits or just influence, but whatever you have to spend, it decreases the amount by a third that you have to spend to resettle a pop from one planet to another. Sedentary decreases natural migration and increases by a third the cost of resettlement. Communal, happiness plus 5%, which is pretty okay. Like, it doesn't bother me at all. I think it's a solid trait for 1 point. It would probably be a real mainstay for a veteran player if it was plus 10%. I think they've kind of balanced that really good because, like, if I can think of nothing else, I might go ahead and put communal in if I've got a point left over and there's nothing else that's really appealing to me. But I'm not gonna, avoid it. But I'm not gonna go out of my way to get it. Solitary, just the exact opposite. Charismatic, other species happiness plus 1%, which happens when you enter in a federation and when you have a lot of treaties going around and allowing a lot of people to resettle into your borders or out of your borders. The happiness of other species in a empire dominated by the primary species, this would increase their happiness. And if you're repugnant, of course, it does the exact opposite. Conformist, ethics divergence is minus 20%. This just means that whatever your starting ethics are, which are going to be right over here under empire, people are less apt, your pops are less apt to develop aberrant ethics. And when you have aberrant ethics, usually it will be, they'll have ethics different from the empire standard, and as a result, they're more likely to, they'll have happiness problems with your policies usually. B, they may want to have a independent sector in a democracy. There's just a lot of problems that actually do pop up for divergence, so that is kind of a big thing. It's kind of interesting that the deviance only gives you an additional point of traits, but it gives them a plus 15 ethics divergence, so it's kind of interesting that they stack one on top of each other like that, and that it isn't really equal, Alright, so we're moving along. We have Venerable, Enduring, and Fleeting. And these just add a number of years to the lifespan of your characters. Specifically, like it would represent the average age of your species being increased. And the longer that your characters live, the more experience they'll gain, the higher levels they'll attain, and thus the more useful they'll be for you. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And then Decadent is going to be a if you don't have slaves, then resource output is reduced by 10%. So if you have a slave population working on a tile, they're going to produce 100%, but if you have a regular pop producing on a tile, they're going to be producing at 90%. So if you take Decadent, you're definitely going to have to take slaves, you're going to have to take Collectivists, and have a slave empire going on, and see how that works out. I'm not quite sure that is actually worth 2 points, because if you think about it, a plus 10% on minerals, let's see, if we go up to industries, plus 15%, 2 points. I mean, yeah, it might work out. It's not that bad. Alright, so, and then the last one is Resilient. Garrison health and fortification defensive bonus is, both of those are increased. So essentially this makes it harder for the enemy to attack and take over your planets. And we'll get all into that a little bit more in depth as we go into the game. Alright, so go to Ruler, and Ruler is going to be a lot more aesthetic type things. You can choose a random name, blah blah blah, sexes, all that type of stuff. Go to Homeworld. We have the ability to choose our class as well as choose our starting solar system. And the options that you have normally are going to be Random, Sol System, and Deneb. And Deneb is the home system for the Commonwealth of Man. Whereas, of course, Sol is the home system for Earth. Yeah, so we'll see what that looks like in a minute. City appearance, and once again, these are entirely aesthetic. So you can, it doesn't do anything. And there's a plantoid city. That's pretty neat. All right, government and ethics. This is the other thing that you choose on the screen that does have prominent in-game impact. Alright, so you're going to choose your ethics. You have a total of 8 ethics options that you can choose from, and within each ethics options you have 2 degrees of, I guess, dedication, you can call it. So let's go and check out Individualist. This is Individualist. You can either be regular Individualist or you can be Fanatic Individualist. And if you take a look at there, we have Empire modifiers. We have Happiness Impact minus 60, Migration Attraction plus 30. We have 15% energy credit minus 100% slavery tolerance. Policy Happiness Impact is minus 60%. So if you have a policy that apparently causes negative happiness, that will impact 60% less than otherwise. Migration Attraction, because you're Individualist, people want to move to your place, so they're going to come at it 30%. Or 30% more population is going to want to come to that empire. One of the interesting things about the ethics wheel is that every ethics has a contra or counter ethic that you automatically disqualify yourself from. So it's kind of like an axis, left and right, and to the corners and up and down. You can kind of think of it as being something like a weirdly spaced political compass, though technically, so that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, so 1, 2, 3, yeah, so there'd be 4 dimensions that this compass would have to be represented in. Anyhow, so Individualist, the contra ethic to that would be Collectivist. And Collectivist adds, reduces the cost of faction suppression, increases slavery tolerance, and decreases food consumption. So essentially you're going to have a massive booming population that grows really quickly, and you're going to have easier time suppressing aberrant factions in your empire, and you're going to have a lot more slaves. Alright, so another one that we have is Materialist. And once again, because this is contra to Individualist, you cannot have Collectivist and Individualist at the same time. Alright, so let's go on to Materialist. Materialist gives a empire-wide cost to building, and that's both on-planet buildings as well as space stations, of -5%. Fanatic Materialist is -15%. And on top of these, it gives a population modifier when producing physics, society, and engineering of +5%, and a population modifier of when producing physics, society, and engineering of +15%. It is interesting to note that this science boost applies only to science that is produced on planet with a population working a tile. It does not apply to stations that are in orbit around black holes or anything that's produced directly without a population working it. The opposite of Materialist is going to be Spiritualist, and Spiritualist is going to reduce ethics divergence and reduce population growth time, and so that's awesome. So you're going to have a lot less people that are going to be aberrant, so you're not going to have to worry too much about your democracy if you're a spiritual democracy or what have you. And your growth, your population is going to grow fairly fast. And they are contrary to one another, so you cannot have these at the same time. Alright, so the next one is Pacifist. Pacifist is going to be, you're going to reduce the amount of influence that you gain, and we'll talk about influence when I actually get into the regular game, but you're going to reduce the amount of influence that you gain, and you're going to reduce the amount of influence that you gain against your rivals, and you're going to reduce the amount of influence that you need for various diplomatic operations and actions. In addition, you're going to have a population modifier that during peace, your happiness is going to be +5%. During war, your happiness is going to be at -5%. So you're going to want to be at peace as much as possible and at war as little as possible. As you see, Fanatic Pacifist really hits you with a peace modifier and a war modifier. You're going to really not gain anything from rivalries, but the influence cost of diplomatic actions is going to be very much reduced by 3/4 by having Fanatic Pacifist. And you'll see these different governments over here to the right lighting up as I click different combinations, and we'll talk about those in a minute. Alright, so let's go ahead and undo that and go with the contra to that is going to be Militarist. Militarist is going to do rivalry influence gain is going to be +25%, and weapons damage is +3%. During war, your happiness is going to increase by +10%. It should be noted, and it is interesting, that during peace, you're not actually getting a negative. So it's kind of interesting how much stronger Militarist seems. The real benefit to Pacifist, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is going to be their government types. Fanatic Militarist, you're going to have a huge increase in influence gain against your rivals by 75%, a really strong weapons damage modifier of +10%, and your war happiness is going to be +10%. You'll notice war happiness does not actually increase. And you'll notice also, if you look at the ethic points that are left, you start out with 3. A regular variant costs 1 point. A fanatic variant costs 2 points. So you can have 1 fanatic and 1 other thing, or you can have 3 standard variants. Alright, let's talk about Xenophile. Alright, Xenophile is going to give you a +25% to Empire. Like, you get a trust bonus to relations that grows over time as long as you have good relations with the other empire. The amount of trust growth is going to increase by 25%. The speed of trust growth is going to increase by 25% with just a standard Xenophile ethics choice. And your pop modifier Xenophobia is going to be -10%, or excuse me, -5%. And Xenophobia is going to be some pops that are living on planet with another population, another species. They may get a negative happiness modifier from that population being on their planet. Sometimes you can get it from ethics, you can get it from a few different other things, but this will reduce that amount of negative unhappiness by 5%. If we go here, trust growth is +75%, so it's really strong trust growth, and Xenophobia is reduced by 15%. So once again, you're going to be much more happier with your population living in, mixed planets and what have you. The opposite of that is going to, of course, be the xenophobe ethics choice, which you're going to have one more maximum rivalry. You're going to have stronger borders by 10%, so your borders are going to grow a little bit faster or be a little bit larger, and your population is going to have +5 xenophobia. So if they're living on a planet with another species, they're going to get a 5% negative happiness malice because of xenophobia at the very minimum. If they already had a negative malice from something else, it's going to be up to 10%, 15%, what have you. In addition, they're going to be really, really tolerant towards enslaving alien species. And we see the xenophobia increases, planet border extrusion increases, and rivalries increase. So that covers the core idea behind the ethics. So let's go ahead and take a look at the governments. Right, so at the very start, we're gonna, no matter what ethics choices you have, you're gonna have the option between a despotic empire, a plutocratic oligarchy, and an indirect democracy. And I do believe those do not, no, they do change. Yeah, they do change, okay. Alright, so let's talk about changing the left and the right. All the governments on this side here are going to be autocracies, and all the governments on this side are going to be more or less democratic or republican in nature. These governments in the middle are going to be either true oligarchies or oligarchies that have kind of some sort of mix of republican influence on them. And if we select individualist, it's going to reduce the amount of it's going to reduce our access to autocratic empires. So if you select any individualist individualist trait, you reduce your chance of having any of these autocratic. And in fact, if you choose fanatic individualist, you can no longer have oligarchies. Okay. Now, if we go collectivist, if we go 1 point of collectivist, you can only have, it reduces your ability to have indirect, democratic governments. If we go fanatic collectivist, it reduces your chance. You can no longer have oligarchies or, anything in that middle column. All right, now, different choices add different levels going upwards. So if we go militarist, we add all these options. And once again, you can further reduce to which side, the left or the right, that you have access to by picking collectivist or individualist. Adding fanatic militarist does not increase or decrease your access to these. It just, all you have to have is one slot in militarist in order to get access to the military government types. All right, let's talk about, let me get a drink here. Let's go ahead and talk about these 3 military government types. And we'll proceed down the rows this direction. All right, naval capacity is increased by 10%, ship cost is decreased by 10, and rivalry influence gain is increased by 25%. So essentially, you're going to have more ships. Ships are going to be cheaper to build, and you're going to gain more influence for having rivalries and taking actions against your rivals than otherwise. A military junta. This is a oligarchy, or apparently an oligarchic republic. Ship upkeep is going to be reduced by 5%. The cost to upgrade a ship is reduced by 1/4. Your admirals are going to be even more skilled than usual. Your leader is going to serve 40 to 50 years, and there's also a set oligarchy rules about what each oligarchy, any oligarchy that you pick is going to have some agenda rules, and we'll talk about that a little bit because the rules for a democracy and the rules for an oligarchy are kind of similar in that there's an agenda and you have to fulfill certain things in order to get a special bonus. Now let's go ahead and move on to military republic. They hold an election every 10 years. Army damage is going to be increased by 10%. Army upkeep is reduced by 20%. Military station build cost is reduced by 15%. Military station damage increased by 10%. So what's interesting is military republic does very much seem like it's a defensive military government choice. Like, they don't want to be offensive, I suppose. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Sort of in the same way that the oligarchies will have an agenda system, the military republics, any of the democratic governments, have this kind of system, an election system that, well, they both have an election system, but when the election is over for a democracy, you get a special campaign promise type of thing that you have to fulfill, and if you fulfill it, you get a little bit extra influence. So that's what I was talking about there. And we'll see a little bit about that when I get in game. Let me just go ahead and finish with this for right now. Alright, so the next level is going to be the spiritualist government. Alright, so starting with Divine Mandate, which is the autocratic version of a spiritualist government. You're going to have a reduction in the cost to implement edicts, an increase in edict duration, and a further divergence of ethics of 10%. So a divine mandate government that is highly collectivist. You're not going to have anybody really, getting out of line or developing their own thought process, I guess you could say. Your pops are going to stay pretty homogeneous during the course of your game, more than likely. Theocratic oligarchy. This is, once again, a oligarchy. You have an election every 40 to 50 years, as it says. Resettlement cost is reduced. Leader lifespan is increased by 20 years. Really interesting, if not kind of like a blah choice. You know what? I shouldn't influence anybody. I hope you like theocratic oligarchy. Alright, theocratic republic. Happiness is increased by 5% and food consumption is decreased by 10%, which is really interesting because they get a happiness bonus and a food consumption reduction by 10%. So it kind of breaks a little bit into what collectivism had done. So that's actually a really good, interesting choice for spiritualist governments. Alright, so what we find is that these set of governments, and these are going to be the materialists, are going to be incompatible with any theocratic government because they depend upon the materialist ethics choice. And these governments, which are the quote-unquote good governments, are going to be incompatible with the militarist governments because they are dependent upon divergent ethics choices. So pretty much you're going to be choosing materialists, and as a result you can't choose spiritualists, so thus they will never show up in the same selection process. Despotic Hegemony. Each ruler can build an elite assault army, which is like a special unit. I don't think, did I cover? Yeah, each ruler can build an oversized ship. I forgot to cover that in military dictatorship. Each ruler can build a tomb monument building. I have actually never played Divine Mandate, so I have no idea what a tomb monument building does. Anyhow, elite assault army is just a slightly better assault army. Research speed is increased by 5%. Research station build cost is reduced by negative 25%. So it's reduced by a quarter, and that's on top of the already nice reduction in building cost for being materialist in the first place. So you can imagine that if you're materialist and you have this, the cost to produce research station is going to be reduced by 30%. Wait, yeah, 30%. If you have fanatic materialist, you're going to be paying 40% less, half as much, to build your research stations, which is really interesting, really awesome. Yeah, that's it. Okay, Science Directorate. Once again, it's an oligarchy. They have agendas. You get one research alternative, and we'll take a very quick look at that at the very start of the game when I show you everything. And your empire leader capacity is increased by 1. You'll notice that I think all the oligarchies increase the skills or traits of your leadership pool, or the leaders in your leadership pool. So yeah, there's kind of that focus in terms of an oligarchy. Research alternatives, you're going to have one more research alternative, and we'll explore that when we get in game. You can have one more available leader in your leader pool. Direct democracy holds an election every 10 years. Happiness is 5%, and leader experience gain is going to be plus 15%. So your leaders are going to level up a lot faster, and your people are just going to naturally be happy. And this is a result of a direct democracy. All right, let's go ahead and explore the peaceful government types. And the peaceful government types, I've always felt the ethics choice for Pacifist itself was rather limited and kind of stupid, but they make up for it, in my opinion, with their government types. Of course, you do get some significant malices to go into war, and there's a bunch of policies that you can't implement. Like you really can't invade anybody, and it's an uphill battle just to get your people to agree with uplifting a species and all sorts of stuff. That being said, I think the governments are fairly strong. Let's go ahead and take a look. Enlightened monarchy. Edict cost is reduced by 15%. Edict duration is increased by 15%. So it's easier on your influence pool to cast edicts or to implement edicts, and they last longer. In addition, you get 2 core systems. And when I say core systems, at the start of the game, you have a certain number of systems that you can personally control, or the active player can personally control before having to build sectors in order to manage the extra systems. And I do believe that at the start of the game, in vanilla, you get 5 systems. So with Enlightened Monarchy, you'd get 7. Which is actually like really, really strong. If you go above this limit, you start getting a negative malice to your mineral and energy income. Now let's go to Peaceful Bureaucracy. Peaceful Bureaucracy has nothing else attached to it. It just has plus 5 core systems. So you're going to be starting out with 10 core systems instead of 5 core systems, or whatever it was. Which is it's an interesting choice. I've played it a couple times, and I don't like using sectors all that much because the sector AI is kind of stupid. So, moral democracy holds an election every 10 years to select a new leader. Leader pool size is +1. Empire leader capacity is +1. So you get more leaders to select from when you're selecting a new leader. You can have more leaders in your empire, period, because of this, because of moral democracy. On top of that, you have 2 extra core systems, and it's just like I explained with Enlightened Democracy. Alright, let's go ahead and take a look at the 3 basic government types. And this is if you had no other ethics, you will pretty much always have these options available to you, with the exception of, changing them around based on collectivist and fanatic, fanatic government types, etc., etc. Excuse me, collectivist and individualist government types. Alright, so despotic empire, excuse me. Each ruler can build an oversized military station. I forgot to cover this one. You can build a park. The park adds something like, I want to say, 10% happiness on the planet. It takes up a tile. May or may not be worth it. There's usually a purple technology that kind of pops up, I would say, probably 1 in every 3 games. And I would say if you stay long enough in any game, you're probably going to pop it up within the first 100 years or so. But once you pop it up, you're probably not going to see it again. But there's a planetary improvement called a Paradise Dome, and I think that is far better because it produces not only food but happiness. Military station. So essentially, it's just an oversized military station. It has more slots that can be equipped. Colony influence bonus -15%. Influence cost -15%. Whenever you're building, let me get a drink. Whenever you move a colony ship to a new planet in order to colonize it, you have to pay a number of influence in order to colonize that planet. If it's in your borders, that's 30 influence points. Outside of your borders depends upon how far from your borders it is, and that's how much influence you would have to pay. Planet Planet border extrusion is just an increase in border propagation. Plutocratic oligarchy, an increase in energy credits and mineral income. and mining stations are reduced by 25% the cost to build them. Indirect democracy increases the leader's skill, and leaders cost 15% less influence to recruit. Okay, next up is another aesthetic portion, which is choosing the empire name as well as the adjective associated with your empire. Once again, it's completely aesthetic. Choosing your flag. If you're a vexillologist, you're going to find this part a little bit fun. There's a lot of different flag symbols. It's entirely aesthetic in nature, yet, you know, it's pretty fun, like I said. And then the last portion of designing a new species is going to be the starting weapons. You can choose from projectile weapons, energy weapons, and missile weapons. Missile weapons tend to have range, and I believe missile weapons have long range, very, very slow firing speed, and high damage. Projectile weapons have short range, high speed, and moderate amounts of damage, and I believe energy weapons have medium amount of range, low damage, and high firing speed. Something like that. People in the Reddit will be able to clarify more about the difference between projectile, energy, and missile weapons, especially as I'm currently in the process of losing my voice right now. Okay, so there are 3 different types of starting warp travel. Once you've picked your type of warp or fast and light travel, you cannot change out of this travel type, at least not yet. Or I think they'll probably add some different FTL methods and all sorts of stuff with future expansions. But the default type is warp travel, in which case you make small little jumps from one system to the next within a radius, and that radius depends upon the size of the radius depends upon the current level of warp engine you have available. Hyperspace travel is the kind of intermediate, and it allows you to travel much in the same way along warp travel, only it's much quicker because you don't have to wind up or wind down, but you're traveling along predefined hyperspace lanes, so you can really predict where the enemy can go or will go if they're using hyperspace engines, if you're able to see the hyperspace lanes. Wormhole travel is an advanced version. Wormhole travel allows you to instantaneously jump from one place to the next. It is faster. There's very little wind-up time. However, there is one big drawback, and that is without a sufficient construction ship or an existing wormhole travel infrastructure at the other system, your ship will not be able to return. So when you do make a jump with a fleet, you have to include a construction ship in order to establish the infrastructure that you need to continue your campaign against the species if you are a wormhole using species. One of the cool things about wormhole travel is that you do literally jump over from one place to another. You cease to exist in one place and do exist in the other. That means that, let's say, like I'm here or whatever, like there's a space empire here, there's an enemy space empire like right here in a place I want to colonize. If I jump from here to here, if I have that technology to make that range, it technically does not qualify as me going through the enemy's borders, so I can reach places that might have been out of range otherwise. So wormhole travel is actually really good for expansion. You just have to make sure that you send along construction ships and protect them adequately. Alright, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and pick a default empire and play a few rounds and explain a few other things that you'll need to know as a player in Stellacracy in order to make the most informed decisions possible. With that, I'm going to go ahead and choose the Commonwealth of Man, who starts with red lasers, wormhole travel, and humanoid ships, as opposed to the UN, who starts with nukes, warp travel, and humanoid ships. So we're going to go with Commonwealth of Man. So stay tuned.